Hi, it's Todd. I suspect you might know me from some of the other videos that we do, the in the labs videos and so on. Well, I'm here today to talk a little bit about segmenting, a new feature in version 11 of our software that's really quite exciting. And when I first heard about it, I started to sketch out some really interesting ideas for a project that we might actually create in the future. And little did I know, when I was asked to do this project, I had this little sketch in my planning book to take a look at. And so with this as a start, I sent this off to our 3D modeler with very, very little information. I didn't want him to create us a perfect model. I wanted it to be imperfect, so when I was slicing it, I could show you how to fix different things that happened. Anyway, I sent him this lovely reference photo, and then he went on to send us a full 3D model of this, something that you might see in the 3D printing world, something that you might print on your 3D printer, but I wanted to take it and make something even neater than just that. So my process will be to take this model into our software, segment it up into the parts that I need, and then go ahead and break those segments up onto sheets. Again, one of our new features of version 11, where I can keep everything all together in one file. And then I can use those different sheets to go ahead and make edits to the models or the parts of the models that I need, and then we can go ahead and cut that. So in this presentation, I'm going to start out showing you these key steps, and then we're going to jump right into the finished file where I'll talk about the tooling. Okay, to get started, we're going to need to set up a new job and then get right into segmenting this 3D model. Okay, so we have a new instance of Aspire up here and running, and we are going to create a brand new file. And we're going to take a look at our job setup form. So the first thing we're going to need to choose is our job type. And this will be a double-sided job. There are two parts, both the bottle and the base will need to be double-sided. The bottle will need to hollow out the underside of it. And with the base, we're going to need to create an interesting angled hole in the base that needs to be cut from both sides. So this will be a double-sided job. Now with the actual job size, we're just going to roughly sort of figure out what we want it to be. So I know that I would like the width of it to be, the width of my base to be around a foot, so 12 inches. So we're going to start off with that, with the 12 inches. And just to make life easy, we're going to make it a square piece of material, or a square sheet, because we're sort of setting up our first sheet here. And the thickness, now I know that in the labs, most of our material runs, some of it's thicker than an inch, some of it's thinner than an inch, but on average, and especially for this project, most of my parts, I'm probably going to utilize a 1-inch thick material. So we're going to put that in there. This is inches. We're going to zero off our material surface. Now, some of you may want to zero the top side off of the material surface and then the back side off of your machine bed. So you can do that if you would like to here, but I'm going to choose to zero off my material surface on both sides, but you can choose whatever you'd like to do in the end. I'm going to set my datum to be the center for right now as I'm laying out and designing my project, but in the end, when I create my tooling, I'm going to move them all of my sheets datum to the bottom left-hand corner. I'm going to flip from bottom to top, and my modeling resolution is going to be very high. I want to have a good pixel density to work with for my segmented components that I'm going to make here in the end. And for my material settings, we're just going to choose Canadian Maple, and then we're going to click OK. Now to bring in our 3D model, we're going to need to go to our modeling tab, and we're going to import in a component or 3D model. So we're going to click on that, navigate over to where this demonstration was installed, and you'll find bottle in water.stl. So we're going to select that and open that up. As soon as it loads in, you'll see that it's really quite big compared to our actual job size, and that's that little square down here inside of the gizmo here, the positioning gizmo. So what we're going to need to do is we're obviously going to need to make this much smaller than what it is. But first of all, we get a chance to choose the initial orientation of our import. Right now, this is looking at it from the top. We can choose the right, the front, or the bottom. And all of these may have different reasons for choosing them depending on what slices you want to make or what segmenting you're going to do in the end and all that kind of stuff. But for me right now, we're going to go ahead and choose the top. Now, as I said, this is quite a bit larger than our actual job space. So we're going to go into our model size and we're going to change the x-axis here, or the x dimension, to be something less than a foot. So we're going to make it 11.5. That'll still give me room to get my tool around the outside edge if I need to. And then we can click apply. And you'll see that it's much smaller and it actually fits into the average sort of space that we have here to work with, okay? Or the relative space. We're not going to bother to apply any perspective to our 3D model. Now this might come in handy if you're going to bring in like a statue or something like that and you're going to create a relief from it, then adding some perspective is really quite nice. But for this job, we're not going to do that. And we're going to center our model in there too. Make sure that's centered. We can check that out just by looking straight down on our job or on the edge of our job and make sure that everything is nice and centered like it should be, and it looks great. Now we have the choice. If we wanted to, we could simply go ahead and position our modeling plane or position our model relative to our modeling plane and import that in, or we can go ahead and segment it. If by mistake you choose position and import, we have a nice back button here that you can go ahead and use to bring yourself back out of that again, just in case you kind of mess up. Let's go right into our segmenting now. Now, right off the bat, you're going to see in our 3D view a few things have changed. There's now this green sort of see-through segmenting plane, and then we have this extra little handle with the arrow at the top, and this will allow us to actually pull and push this segmenting plane through our 3D component to tell the software where we'd like to segment a part into. We have an edit mode, which is currently in right now. We have a layout mode, which we'll look at in a few minutes. And then we can manually position or make slight adjustments to our segmenting plane if we need to. We can reset the rotation, which comes in really handy if you get it all wonky. And then we can go ahead and tell the software to go ahead and segment it wherever the segmenting plane is located. Below that, we have our segment viewer. And currently right now, we just have one segment, which is our full 3D model, and it's called Bottle in Water. So the first thing we're going to want to do now is to actually position this plane where it belongs. Now, there's a couple of different things we can do. We can go ahead, like I said, and we could position it by just typing in some numbers up here, or we can go ahead and grab this little arrow and we can push down the plane, or we can pull up the plane. So for my first segment, I want it to be segmented just below, as far as I can, to the bottom of my bottle, but also not having too much of the wave peaks in this particular segment. Now, there will be some in the end, and we can go ahead and attach those back to the base again once we segmented them off if we want to. I'm just going to keep moving that down to the point that I think it's pretty close. I'll see the waves start to poke up through there, right there. So that's all right, a little bit higher, maybe down a little bit farther. That's good right there. I think it's as close as I can get because I don't want any of these rings to go the full circumference around the bottle. And right here, if I wanted to, I can segment off this ridge right here, and I can segment off these two rings and attach them back to my base. So I'll have a nice solid base again, and I'll show you that in a second. So for right now, I'm really quite happy with that. So let's go ahead and click segment, and you'll see what we have in the end. It's going to show us the top segment here, which is purple. And if I go ahead and select the second segment here, you'll see that that is my base. You'll see there's those tops, flat tops there, because that's where we segmented off the tops of those waves. Now, if we go back and choose the parent model or the full model, then you'll see that we get a combination of all those colors, and we can see the different purples that we have going on. It's hard to tell, but the bottle is actually a darker purple than the base. So let's go ahead now and create our second segmentation. Now, one thing to remember is that we've named these segments, segment 1.1 and segment 1.2. We can go in later and name those properly to help us later on. But for right now, I'm going to leave those the way that they are, and I'm going to rely on the colors to be able to differentiate between the two. So let's look at our 3D view from the Y direction here. And now what we're going to want to do is to click the bottle. We just want the bottle, and you can see there's the top of that wave right there, and there's the other two. If I turn it just slightly on its angle, you can see they're right there. So let's look back on our Y again. And I'm looking at it from this angle so that I can just grab a hold of this green circle, which you'll see over here in the segmenting plane part of the dialog. That's the Y direction, I can turn the plane around, and by holding down my left mouse button, I can hold on to that green circle and rotate it around to there. That's great. And then I can go ahead and grab the blue handle here and I can pull it out so it's clear of my bottle, but it's in between the two, the wave peak and the bottle, and I can tell it to segment that. And you'll see over here in my segmenting tree, I'll have an extra segment. And there it is right there. Perfect. So let's go back to our bottle again. And we're going to go ahead and push that through so that now we have it just peeking out the back. Now I want to make sure I'm clear of my bottle, so it'd be good to take a look at the Y direction again here. Yep, I'm pretty good there. And we're going to go ahead and segment that. Perfect. And now we're just left with the bottle. And let's go back and take a look at our full bottle in water model. And let's just turn it just slightly on its isometric view here so we can take a peek at it. Now we want to reassemble the base back together again before we start messing with our bottle. Now I'm only choosing that because it makes sense to me to do that right now, but you might want to do all of your segmenting and then go back in the end and fix everything. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and heel this wave top back onto the base. And to do that, I'm going to select this, the right segment here, that guy right there, and I'm going to drag it down and drop it on top of the base segment. And you'll see that now it's popped it back on there again for me. Now let's go ahead and find that other segment, this green one. Let's drop it on top of that first segment again. And now we have our full base. So now would be a good time to right click on this and rename this to base. There we have it. Now let's go back to our bottle again. Now, I mentioned about this reset rotation. This is going to come in really handy right now. So if we reset that rotation, we can simply now go ahead and on our x-axis, we can rotate our plane 90 degrees. Let's do that. And we'll press the space bar. And there we have it now right through the center of my bottle. And now I can go ahead and segment that bottle right in half if I want to. So let's go ahead now and segment that. Now I have two pieces of a bottle. There's a bright pink one and then a green one. Now I can go ahead and rename these if I would like to as well. So really these are kind of strange names, but we'll rename this bottle right. And we'll right click on this one and we'll rename this one bottle left. Okay, and there we have it. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our full model again. There we have everything all colored properly. It's only 3 segments. We've got our 2 parts of our bottle and we have our base. And now we can have a chance to go into our layout mode and make sure that everything is the right way around. And now we can go into layout mode and we can make sure that everything gets laid out properly on our modeling plane when we go ahead and import it in. So let's click that. And you'll see that we have our 2 bottle tops and they look okay, nothing wrong with those. We can always move them later where they are, it doesn't really matter so much. But our base is actually flipped upside down. So we're going to double click on that in the 3D view and it will turn red. And then we can go ahead and use our select segment orientation arrows here and we can go ahead and flip it over. And the software will give us some options here until we get it the right way around. And there we have it. That's what we want, is that way up. And that looks great. Okay. Also, we need to position our modeling plane. Now, like I had said to you before, although this is a 2-sided job, we're actually going to keep all of our models proud of the back for right now. Okay. So we want to make sure that our modeling plane is at the very bottom and all of our models are sitting proud of that, which is exactly what it is. Okay, we don't need to highlight any undercuts for this particular job because there really aren't any. There's nothing that I can see obvious here that there would be any. There's no overhanging edges or anything like that. So this all looks great for what it is. So I'm not going to worry about that. I've got my segment viewer. Everything is named properly, at least as far as I need to do it. Okay, we are going to create some back face caps. If we don't do that, then we're going to end up having potentially some open backs and so on. We don't want that. We want to make sure we have those all capped off. We're going to resize our material block to fit all of the slices, and we're not going to need any boundary vectors. We're going to create the ones that we need as we go along, so we can leave that the way it is, and then we're going to go ahead and click import. And there we have it in our 3D view. We have all of our things positioned where we want them to be. Not where we want them to be per se, but everything is sitting on top of our modeling plane like I expected. Everything's named properly here, bottle left, bottle right, and base. It's all there, so that's great. And now I can go ahead and grab these and move them around wherever I'd like them to be. Now, on the off chance something has gone wrong and you look at this and you go, oh shoot, you know what? I really could have gone ahead and segmented this differently. Then what you can do is simply go ahead and right click on any of your segmented components here, and you have the option to re-import that. And as soon as you do, it'll bring you back into your segmenter, and you can go ahead and mess around with segmenting it different ways or heal it and then segment it a different way if you'd like to, whatever you need to do. But that's how you can go in and make any changes if you're not happy with it as it is. Now for me, what I'm going to do, the last little step I'm going to do here is this job size that it created for me is a little bit too big. So I'm going to go to my drawing tab and I'm going to go ahead and change my job size back to being about 13 inches around there, and we're going to click OK, and then I'm going to take a look at my 2D view again, and I'm going to move these onto my job where they need to be, or where they should be. I'm going to flip this pressing V on my keyboard and then H on my keyboard just so I can keep track of everything, and then I'm going to put that on my job as well. Now this is just my design sheet, okay? This is where I'm going to kind of hold these models, these components, because if anything changes or I need to go back to them, once I start to develop my project, then I want to have these around for me so that I have them to refer to or maybe use to slice up or maybe to grab some vectors from or whatever I have to do. I have these still around to kind of work with. Now this part of the process, I'm going to take all of those segments that we've already created and break it up into multiple sheets. This will allow me to keep all of my different files inside of one project. That's one of the great things about our new multi-sheets is that we don't have a whole lot of different files kicking around. We can keep them all in one file, and I can decide what kind of materials I want to use for each part of my end project. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. We're going to start by looking at our 2D view, and you'll see right now we just have one sheet set up here. We also have a look at our Sheets tab here, and you see that we have one sheet. Now the sheet name doesn't show up because there's only one, but if we had more than one sheet, then they would all be named appropriately. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to actually create 3 more sheets. Now, I'm not too worried about the size of them or the thickness right now. I just want to make sure that I get all of my parts out and I kind of organize my job the best that I can. So let's go over here and let's add a brand new sheet. And this one here we are going to call bottle. Okay. And then we're going to add another sheet and we're going to call this one base. And then we're going to add another sheet and we're going to call this sheet base bottom. And then we're going to go back to the one that we have called sheet number 1, and we are going to just simply right click on that and rename that design. And this will be our design sheet. Okay, so we're going to, like I said before, we're going to leave everything here. We're just going to copy bits of this onto other sheets. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take our base. We'll select that in the 2D view, right click on that, and we're going to say copy to sheet base. You'll see that now it's over here on our sheet called base, which is perfect. We're going to grab one of our bottles. It doesn't matter which one. Right click on that and we are going to copy that to sheet called bottle. And this base bottom sheet, we're just going to create a vector from this base, and we're going to use it to create a profile cut to cut a base that we can cap off the bottom of our base with. That way the bottle won't fall all the way through. So we'll get to that in a bit. But for right now, we're going to leave it just blank. So we make it really easy for you to navigate around your different sheets. All you need to do in the 2D view is to go ahead and double click on them and you'll pop over to that sheet. And of course your 3D view will be updated appropriately. So if we tile our views, you can go ahead and jump around all of your sheets. And it's easy to navigate through all of those. And that makes it really good. So let's go back to our bottle for a second. Now, I happen to know that we have some really nice oak kicking around our labs. That's about 1 inch thick. So I'm going to leave this particular sheet at 1 inch for right now until I get into the labs and can verify that. But I think that's perfect for that. When we go to our base, I also know that we have some extra thick old countertop that would look really nice for this base. So I want to go ahead and change the thickness of the base sheet. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on that and go down to edit. And I can go ahead and change this thickness. Now I seem to recall from a job in the past, it was 1.61 inches thick, which I think will be perfect. So let's just go ahead and choose that and we'll click OK. Now let's choose that component in the 3D view, go to our modeling tab, and let's just make sure that that component's thickness will fit with inside of that. And it does, it's perfect. It's just a hair under 1.5 inches, so it'll fit perfectly inside of that material. So let's close that down. Okay, now that we have that selected, let's go ahead and click it again so we can see our transform handles. And let's just go ahead and center that in the middle of our material. So we're going to align to material right in the center. Now I could have pressed F9 on my keyboard, but we may as well use the alignment tools for that. Let's close that down. And now we have all this extra space all around it. So because I'm not going to do much more with the exterior of this, it's not going to get any bigger. Let's go ahead and make this sheet a bit smaller. So let's go back to our sheets again. We have base selected. We can right click on that and go to edit, or we can use the edit button at the very bottom of this form. And let's change this to be 8 inches. That should fit in there okay. That's perfect. And then we'll go ahead and click OK. You're also going to notice that when I did that, it reshuffled my sheets around. So let's just make sure that we know where all of our sheets are again. That looks pretty nice. Now let's have a look at our bottle sheet. We'll double click on that and then we'll select the bottle. And then let's go to our modeling tab and see how thick that is. You see the shape height is 1.3846. So that means it's actually thicker than the 1 inch thickness material that we're going to use, that oak that I talked about. But that's okay. We're going to deal with that in a little bit. So we're going to leave it as it is. I really want to use that oak. I think it would be a nice contrast to the repurposed countertop that we're going to use. So we're going to leave that the way it is, and we'll just deal with that extra thickness in a little bit. So let's go ahead and close that down. And I think now we're ready to go ahead and start to think about what changes we need to make to our components to make them work for us. Okay, now that we have that done, let's take a look at our bottle. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to extend the bottle, and then we're going to have to go ahead and hollow out the inside. Now this is a great time also for us to take a look at the material that we have on hand and how thick we can actually get away with making our bottle in the end. Now it's time to start thinking about completing off the bottle. Now obviously when a bottle is bobbing in the water, part of the bottle is underneath the surface of the water. And in my case, what I want to do is I want to make this so that the bottle is long enough that it fits into a hole that we're going to create later in our base and rests on the base bottom that we're going to add once we get around to finishing this off, okay? So to do that, we need to, first of all, we need to make sure that we have this bottle straight up and down, okay? So to do that, we're going to select it. Now, it would have been nice if this had been modeled at a particular angle, like 45 degrees, and I could have easily straightened it out. But it's not, because if I press 0 with that selected, you'll see that the bottle rotates around, but it never is straight. So let's leave it around there, upside down. We're going to select it, and we'll move it down. And we'll zoom in a little bit with our scroll wheel. And then we're going to drag in a guideline. So if we have our pick tool, we can go ahead and drag in a guideline from our ruler on our left. And we're just going to drop it around here anywhere, just fine. Let's reselect that component. And we're going to rotate it around and try to get it as straight as we can. And let's go ahead and just nudge that up next to that guideline, because we know that guideline is straight. And let's zoom in. That's pretty close. That's pretty darn close. Let's just kind of a little bit more might do it. Yeah, I think that's perfect. That's nice and straight. That's great. We don't need that guideline anymore, so let's drag it off of there. And now what we need to do is we need to figure out how much more bottle we need to add to the bottom of this. Well, to do that, we're going to go and look at our base. So let's go over to our base sheet. Using our scroll, we will zoom in. And this is the area right here that we're actually going to hollow out later on. But that pad is at the right height to tell us how extra thick we need to make our bottle. So as I'm hovering over that flat area, you'll see down here in my bottom left, we'll see a Z height there. So that's 1.4242. Let's round that up to be 1.43. And that's how much longer we're going to make our bottle. Now we could go ahead and make our bottle longer than that or shorter than that. For us right now, that's a good number to stick with. So we're going to make it 1.43 inches longer. Let's go back to our bottle again. And we'll zoom in and we're going to draw a line now. And we're going to make it just about 1.43. So we'll snap to 1.45, press escape. With that selected, we can press T on our keyboard. And we can change that height to be 1.43. And we can click apply. And then we'll close that down. Now we're going to move this line just to be in the center of this pixel right there. And that's probably as close as we can get it to the edge of where we want it to be. Make sure it overlaps just slightly. And then we're going to hold down our control key and drag a copy of that over to there. And we're going to do the same thing. Just put it right in the center of that. Somewhere's in there is great. Now we need a cross section to extrude along those two drive rails. And if you haven't guessed it yet, we're going to be using the tool in our modeling tab called Create a Shape by Sweeping Between Two Rails, or a two-rail sweep. But we need a cross section for that. So to do that, what we're going to do is go to our Drawing tab, and we're going to use our Measuring tool here. Okay, so we're going to click that. And at the very bottom of this, you're going to see we have Model a Cross Section, or Model Cross Section. So we can drop in a line across the model, and it will show us, or it will create a vector that follows along the contours of that relief or that component. Now, when I first did this the first time around, I thought it would be smart just to go straight across this bottle and then use that as my cross section to extrude along these two lines. Well, that's not the right way to do it. What I want to do is get a line that's evenly spaced from the edge of the end of this bottle, but inside just slightly. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to click maybe there. And we're going to go up here and we're going to kind of eyeball that so the space is just about right. I think that's pretty good. And we'll click again. And you see the software has created us a cross section here. Okay, so we'll close this down. And we're going to move that away from the ends of where I created it, just so we can take a closer look at it. We want to look at a couple things. First of all, it needs to be a positive shape. And it is. It's going this way. It's not cupping down, it's going up. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is we want to make sure there aren't any feet sticking out of the bottom of this in either direction. And there's not. So we're good. So now we can go ahead now and create our extra components. Let's go to our modeling tab. We're going to go ahead and choose our Create a Shape by Sweeping. Holding down our Shift key, we're going to select those two drive rails. We're going to use that selection. They're both pointing in the right direction, so that's great. If they aren't, I can just right click on it and say reverse rail. Then I'm going to choose this cross section, and I'm going to not scale it with the width, so it's exactly the right height right now for the distance. So we're going to leave it just like that. We're going to sweep between spans. We're not going to scale it to the exact height. We're going to merge it in, and then we're going to click apply, and we'll have a look at our 3D view for a second. And that looks perfect. So let's close that down. Now I'm not too worried about these lines that you see here because I'm going to do a lot of sanding to this, so they're going to be blown away. I do want to make sure that there isn't a gap in there. There isn't any gap between those two parts. They actually merge into each other, which is perfect. If not, I might need to nudge this extra piece down into my bottle a bit, but I'm happy with that. So let's go ahead now and create one full component from those two parts. We have the bottle and then this little extension. Now to do that, I'm going to go to my modeling tab. I'm going to right click on level 1 and I'm going to insert a new level in. And then on that level, because it's selected, I can go ahead and create a component from the visible model. And then I'm going to hide these two here. Now I'm keeping these around just in case something's gone amiss. Then I can go ahead and I can fix this. So let's go ahead now and we're going to rename this bottle EXT. That means bottle extension. Okay, that's great. Now we've got a longer bottle that's going to fit in there perfectly, or as far as we know it's going to fit in there perfectly. Now we need to think about how we're going to hollow out the inside of this bottle. Well, to start out with, we're going to need to reference this shape on the back side. So from our 2D view, Let's select that bottle, right click on that, and we're going to say copy to the other side. And if we flip over to our other side, you'll see that we have a copy of that bottle there. You can see this light blue cross sections. That's on the other side of our job. That's the cross section that we ended up extruding. That's perfect. And we have this bottle and we're on the back side. Now let's go ahead and tile our views because we're going to want to check this out. Now I'm going to use a feature that we don't use very often, but it's quite popular if you're creating like wall thicknesses for things, or you're going to create a vacuum form molding or something like that, and you need to offset a 3D component outwards or inwards. And that is right here. It is called Create a Component by Offsetting the Visible Model. So to do that, we're going to select this shape. Okay, now remember, this is our copy of our original shape from the other side of the bottle. If we look at both sides of our view right now, you'll see that we have a full bottle, but we don't want that. We want to actually use this shape to create that recess in the back. So with that selected, we're going to go ahead and choose the offset model. Now, if this was a positive number, we can offset it outwards. Because we want to offset inwards, we're going to use a negative. So a negative 1/4 inch. Now the 1/4 inch is a thickness that I've chosen that I feel the wall thickness of this bottle will be able to hold up under any pressure while I'm cutting, and it's not going to break. I think that's a pretty fair thickness to go with. And I'm going to make sure that I clip my Z values to the 0 plane. And you'll see what happens in a minute when I do that. It's actually going to make it so that my part will be smaller, but not get any deeper beyond my modeling plane. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and preview that. And we'll see what we get. Now it's still going to be a positive offsetted shape negatively, if that makes sense. But we can fix that in a sec. Okay, now you're going to see that this has actually gone ahead and done the offset like we want. But again, it is a positive shape. So let's go ahead and click OK here. And we'll see in our component tree that we have the original one and then also the one we just offsetted. So let's go ahead and turn off the original one. And then we can go ahead and right click on that, change our combine mode to subtract, and now you'll see that we have this bottle that's been hollowed out and the wall thickness is 1/4 inch all the way through. Now that's great and all, except for we have a bit of a problem. And that is I want to put a dowel here somewhere so that I can hold the two sides of this together when it's put inside the hole in the base. Of course, the hole in the base will hold the bottom of it together, but I want to make sure the top stays all lined up, okay? It may not hold together, but at least it will line up if I use a dowel. Obviously, you can choose whatever kind of process you'd like to, maybe a magnet or whatever you'd like to use in here. But for me, I'm just going to use a dowel for this time. But to do that right now, I've got this hole here, so I don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete this guy, okay? Let's look straight down on this again. We're going to turn back on our original bottle, and we are going to crop some of this away, okay? Some of the bits we don't need. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our drawing tab, and we're going to grab a rectangle, and we're going to draw a rectangle somewhere around there. Apply that, close that. We're going to freehand it, as you see. And we're just going to do something around there. Be perfect. Let's grab that box, that rectangle, and our actual component. And then we're going to go ahead and trim the area outside of that away. There we have it. That's great. Now what we're going to do, and you can still see the other side is showing there, but let's just turn off the other side for a second. Okay. Look down on that. And now we're going to do the same offset again. Inwards, okay. And we're going to preview that. And there we have it. That looks really good. Perfect. So let's go OK. Again, we're going to have a copy here, so let's hide the original one. And let's take this top one, and it's right now set to emerge. We're going to right click and we're going to change that to be subtract. And there we have it. Let's turn on our other side. And now I have room at the top to put my dowel. I've got the little cavity in the bottom, and that looks great. Looks really, really good. Okay, now let's go back to the front side again. There's one more thing that we need to fix. What we're going to need to do is make sure that this fits with inside my material that I have. And like I mentioned earlier, I've got this 1-inch oak that I'd like to be able to use. Okay, so we're going to make sure that this isn't any thicker than 1 inch. So we're going to go ahead and slice this relief a little bit. So with that selected, we're going to go over here to our slice visible model option. We're going to click that. And right now we're just going to choose 1 inch is going to be our slice. Okay, we're going to make sure that it's not from the top, but it's from the bottom. You can just quickly set that. We're not going to worry about any of this down here. Not important. We're just going to go ahead and slice that model. And so now what I have is we've got a bottle and we've got 2 slices. Okay, if you're looking at our 3D view, you'll see that our bottle isn't round anymore. So let's hide this first one. And now you'll see that we have 2 more components. So we can hide our slice and you'll see what happens. Now we've got our 2 sides showing here. So you'll see that we can actually cut through the bottle there, which is okay, that's perfect. And then we have this little cap slice on the top. So let's go ahead and turn that back on again and let's choose that slice and we can just move it off the bottle and place it where we want to. Now we could move this onto a different sheet if we'd like to, but for me I'm going to leave it on the same sheet because I want to use the same material to cut that cap with so that the material is the same color, because sometimes you get 2 different pieces of oak that look slightly different. Well, these will look exactly the same, which is great. And now what I also need to do is go to the other side and I need to go ahead and do the same with this component that we've subtracted away, okay? So let's turn off our 2D view for a second, or our 2-sided view for a sec. And this is important because right now if I cut this the way it was, then we end up cutting right through the other side of the job right into my spoil board. So we're going to need to go ahead and slice this shape as well. Let's go back to this model again. Let's right click on it. Let's change this to be an add. Okay, we popped it up. We're going to go ahead and slice that again. Same thickness and everything. We're going to set that and then we're going to slice that. But on this side, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and delete that slice. So let's hide this model and we're going to select that slice and then we're going to delete it off of there. And then we're going to go ahead and use this slice and we're going to subtract that. And there we have it. Let's look at both sides of our model again and everything looks exactly right. Looks really good. And now we're ready to go ahead and make a copy of all of those 2 parts and then mirror them so that we can have both sides of our bottle that stick together perfectly. Now let's take a look at the tooling for this sheet. Okay, this is the first look at the file that you're going to receive if you choose to purchase the extras pack. So you'll see here that we have all of our 4 sheets. So if we go to our sheets tab over here, they're all listed there with all their proper dimensions that I used. If we go back again to our modeling tab and just have a look at the setup for this, here we have the 3 parts, the base and the bottle left and right. Now I didn't rename them like I showed you earlier, so that's a good tip, is that you might want to go ahead and go back in here and rename these again, like I did in the original demo that I showed you earlier on in this presentation. Let's have a look at the bottle for now. Double click on that. You'll see that I've added in some notes. First of all, I'm going to cut the back side first. Okay, that's important because we'll be pocketing out or clearing out all the material from the back side of that bottle. And I was a little bit worried that if I did that after I'd cut the top of the bottles, then I'd be relying on my tabs to hold it in place while it did the roughing and the finishing. And I was a little unsure that was going to work out. So I just made a note to myself to make sure I cut the back side first. Now some of you may be asking, why didn't I use this feature over here under the edit tab called swap sides? Well, when you do that, it swaps the sides of all your sheets. So it didn't help me any. And I didn't want to go through the work of cutting and pasting everything from the front side to the back side and so on. By that point, I was too far in. So I just felt doing it this way was my best option. Now you'll see that there's a few extra things on the front side of our bottle. We have these dowel holes here for us because we're going to need those to do a 2-sided flip. And we also have some outline vectors here I use to isolate my tooling. So let's flip over to the back side of this for a second. And here we have the back side. It looks just like what I showed you earlier. We have the silhouette here, or the profile of my bottle, which I created that later to help my tooling. We have this inside vector here that we use to create the hole or the pocket on the back of our bottle. And we have this rectangle that I used to crop down the original bottle that I used to offset inwards that minus 0.25 of an inch. We have two new holes here, two new circles here. These are for the dowel at the top of the bottle to kind of line everything up so it looks right when it's sitting in the base. This vector here is slightly smaller than the one that I'm going to use to cut this side's hole with, and that's what the note says up here. I chose to use a vector instead of offsetting my toolpath because I only wanted one toolpath. So using this smaller vector and this larger vector, it was the same thing. It's just an offset from the original copy of that inside vector. So that does the same thing, and I only had to worry about one toolpath, not creating two. I was a bit lazy there, I guess. So that was pretty easy. Let's take a look at our toolpaths. It's a pretty basic set of toolpaths. We have our dowel holes, we have our pin holes, which are just pocket holes for the center here. We've got our 3D roughing and our 3D finishing. Now we'll preview all of this in a second. But let's have a look at our other side. Okay, again, we have a set of toolpaths here. We have the one at the top, that's our dowel holes with the waste board at the end. That reminds me that I need to cut these into my waste board, not into my material. I have a clearing pocket. Now what this is for is just to clear out any extra material I have in that hole. And you'll see that in a second. I was a bit worried that if there was any kind of inconsistencies in my material thickness or where I was zeroing from, that I might end up not having a hole there. There might be a weird thin piece of material that wouldn't look all that great. So this goes in and cleans that out and gives me a nice edge there, which I feel will work pretty good. Then we have our 3D roughing, which is pretty standard stuff, and our 3D finishing. Another thing I want to point out about this is I'm only finishing when we do the bottle between these two vectors, so I'm not going to waste my time cutting along the flat top here. I felt that if there's any kind of a lip, I could sand it down pretty easily, and so I didn't want to waste the time cutting that there. Let's have a look at our 3D view. And now you'll notice right away in the 3D view, because I'm viewing both sides, that there's this extra sort of bit of material here that we didn't have before. That comes from the bottom side, and that's because I've added in a zero plane. I didn't want my tool to fall off the edge here. I wanted it to stay up top, so that's why that's there. Okay, I added that in. I didn't point that out earlier. Great, so let's go ahead and preview all of the tooling for both sides of this. There are the dowel holes, there's the roughing and the finishing. Here we have the roughing, the finishing, and so on. Now we flip it over. You'll see that there's that little bit of a clearing pocket I put in there just to make sure those edges were nice and sharp in there so that when you looked at it from the inside of the bottle, it would look okay. Now also you'll notice there's a bit of a thin onion skin here. That's going to vary depending on the consistency of your material thickness. If anything, it'll give you a little bit more stability if your tabs aren't quite thick enough, or you actually might even cut through, which I think I'd made my tabs, my 3D tabs thick enough. We take a look at my level over here called 3D tabs. I've got tons in there, and they are pretty thick, and I think in this oak they should hold quite well. So I think I'm pretty much ready with those tool paths to go ahead and cut that. Okay, let's get that piece of oak put down to our waste board. Now I started off by putting 4 screws in my piece of oak, but then I noticed that it might have been a little bit bowed in the middle there, so I thought I better add in a 5th screw just to be sure. I did check with my files to make sure I was going to avoid everything. We're going to start off with our end mill, and we're going to go in and we're going to cut the dowel holes, and then we're going to cut the holes for the pin to hold the top of the bottle together. These are just simple pocket cuts at specific depths. Then we're going to go in and start our roughing pass for the inside of the bottle. And I've chosen to go down level by level, so you'll see that it will go down the pass depth of my tool in one of those pockets, or one of the insides of the bottle, and I'll move on to the other and do the same with the other, and it'll jump back and forth between each bottle side. You might want to adjust that depending on your needs, but I felt removing the material evenly from both of those pockets might lessen the amount of stress that would be relieved from my wood at one time, or at least make it even. So then I swapped out and put in my big ball nose end mill, and we're going to go in and do a finishing pass. Now I decided to use offset tooling for this. I figured on the inside of the bottle, it really didn't matter if there was any tooling lines. Now right here you'll see there's a bit of a dip at the top of each of the pockets. This is my first indication that probably where I zeroed off my material was a bit lower than what I expected, so I end up having a little bit of a mark. Test fitted my pin in there, and that's perfect. Tighten one and loosen the other. Then we'll take that off and then flip it over. Before we actually put our material down to our wasteboard, we're going to run those dowel holes again on the second side right into my wasteboard. That way I can put in my pins to hold it down. Bit tight, so I had to use the old hammer to get them in there. Then I'll put down the board and then push it on. Now again, I wanted to make sure that it was as flat as possible, but it was kind of hard because at that end of the board it did seem to be bowed slightly upwards and the screws didn't quite pull it down tight like I was hoping for. But that was the best I could do, so I went ahead and moved on and started that pocket in the middle of the hole of the recess in the back of the bottle. And this again, if I had had everything lined up correctly, that may have actually removed some material, but in this case, because of the bowing of the material, it didn't, which meant I'm probably going to have to go back and do some extra sanding. So here we go with the roughing of the outside of my bottle. And again, we're going to go down level by level. I guess I was hoping again that this might evenly remove the lion's share of the material, and if I was going to have any warping or bending, then it would be even across my whole part. Once it was all done, I popped in that big ball nose again and went back and did my finishing pass. In this case, I decided to do a raster. That way I'd have the tooling lines going across my bottle. I thought that might help me get rid of them a bit easier in the end. I'm not sure if that helped or not, but at least in theory, I think it helped out. And here you'll see that I didn't actually include in my finishing pass that extra vector, so I'm going all the way across the top of my bottle. In your tooling, I actually added in that extra vector, so you'll stop at the top of that ridge and then go back down again. And we'll finish off those extra bits. And when I pulled it off, I could see that I had that onion skin there. It was thin at that end, but it was thicker at the bottom and in some places, so I knew that things, again, were going to require a bit more sanding than what I was kind of hoping for. Also, the tabs, they were quite aggressively thick, so maybe I could have gone with a bit thinner tabs, but it's better to be safe than sorry. After I cut out all the parts, just roughly, then I could stack them together and see if I was getting the results that I wanted. We'll put those parts aside and finish them later. Okay, now that we have the bottle figured out, let's take a look at the base. And we're going to need some of the vectors that we use to extend the bottle so that we can make sure that we get the base right. So let's go over to our base sheet, and right there is our base sheet, and all we have on that currently now is just that one component for the base, which is perfectly fine. And now what we need to do is we need to create a hole in the top of this base, but not just a hole straight through. It needs to be a hole on an angle so that we can slide our bottle in on the angle that it was in the original 3D model that we had. And that's at this angle right here, this bottle over on our design sheet. So the first thing we can do is we're going to go over to our design sheet and we're going to create a vector boundary from this component. Okay, so we'll select that, we'll go to our modeling tab and we'll create a vector boundary. There we are, and we'll select that vector boundary and we'll right click on that and we are going to move that to the sheet called base. So there we go, it's come off of this one and now it's over here on our base sheet. So let's double click on our base sheet now. And we're gonna take this bottle and we're gonna line it up with the hole or the flat part of the hole and just make sure that it still does fit. It does fit within a pixel or two of what we need. So that's pretty good. And so what we need now is the reference to the extension that we added onto it. And that happens down on our bottle sheet. So we're going to go to our bottle sheet and we are going to select all of the two legs by box selecting those. Then we'll hold down our shift key and we're going to grab this outside vector and whatever comes along with it. Because all we really need is that second selection of vectors to help line up the proper angle. So we're going to right click on that and we're going to say copy to sheet base. We don't want to move it, we want to copy it. And so that's happened. Let's go back to our base again. And then we're going to select all of those and we're going to press 9 on our keyboard to roughly get it at the right angle that we need. And that's pretty close. Then we're going to grab it from this corner here and we're going to snap it to that corner of the bottle. Now what we can do is we can move our rotation center of this set of selected vectors from the center to somewhere roughly up there. And then we can grab this rotation handle down here and we can rotate that around. And we're just going to line it up again approximately where it needs to be. This doesn't need to be perfect, but the closer we get it, the better. We'll off select everything and then we'll select just that set of vectors there and we'll delete those and we have our legs now lined up where they should be. You just nudge them into place if they're not quite exactly where they should be. So that's great. So what this does for us is it tells us or shows us that when the bottle enters our base, it's going to be fit into the hole that's lined up right there. And then on the back side, our hole shifts over this amount. And this angle that we have here is the actual angle that we need to add to the inside of this top hole. And this angle is what we need to remove from the back side of the same hole on the other side. Okay, now that might not make a whole lot of sense right now, but in a second it will. So to do this, what we're going to want to do is to actually get a shape of this base right here, this flat area that's on the top of our 3D component. So we're going to select that component. You'll see it's selected here in our component tree. I'm going to go to our drawing tab and we are going to choose to trace the bitmap. We're just going to click on that plateau. We'll click preview and then apply and then close. And then we'll select that vector. We're going to right click on it. We'll ungroup that, ungroup back onto the original object's layers. Hold down our shift key and unselect the one we want to keep. Okay, and then we're press delete on our keyboard and now we have that circle. Okay, so this will define the top of that plateau, which makes sense. Now what we want to do is we want to copy it and move it over so we can indicate where the exit hole is going to be on the other side. Okay, that should make sense. So we're going to hold down our control key and we'll just drag that over. We hold down our alt key and that'll make sure it locks into place. We'll leave it there for now. We want to make sure it lines up. So we'll go to our pick tool and we'll drag in a guideline and we'll just place it at the end point of that leg. And then we can go ahead and nudge this into place where it needs to be. And there we have it. That's great. Perfect. Now we don't need this guideline anymore, so we can get rid of that. So what we have now is the layout for the top hole and where the bottom hole should be on the other side. And then we have enough vectors here, believe it or not, to create a 3D shape that we can subtract out and then level clip to only keep the bit that we want to do to create this interesting kind of hole that typically you can't do on a CNC machine because we need to have an undercut and we can't do that on a 4-axis CNC easily. 3 or 4 axis, excuse me. So let's go ahead now and select these two vectors and we are going to copy those to our clipboard. So we're going to go Control C. Okay, so we have a copy of those in our computer's clipboard. Now with those selected, we're going to offset these out just slightly. And we're going to do that because we want to be sure that our hole is slightly bigger than what we need. It's always good to have a little bit bigger in case there's any variance at all. So we're going to offset outwards 0.02 and we can delete our original vectors and we'll offset those out. We're going to continue anyway. And there we have it. That's okay. We're going to delete that one. No problem. Now we're going to, we only have this outside one, right? We deleted everything else. Now we're going to go Control V and we're going to paste in our original ones again. Now what we want to do is we only want to keep the two areas where the two circles overlap. So with those selected, we can go ahead and just choose the overlap. That's what we have there. Perfect. And then we're going to paste this back in again. Okay. And then we're going to individually, one at a time, offset those outwards that same dimension. So we're going to go outwards and we're going to delete our original. Okay. Offset. And we're going to do the same with this fella here, and we're going to offset him. Close. And now we're going to take this vector that we offsetted and we're going to move it to the other side. So we're going to move it to the other side. Now this is what we should see at the top. So what we have is we have a vector shape that encompasses both those circles. We have one that will show us the top of that circle, and then we can use this circle here to clip the level so that we can only have half of our shape showing. Okay, easy enough. So now let's go back to our modeling tab for a second. Let's go ahead and tile our views left and right. Actually, we'll just make sure, we'll just maximize that. That's fine. We'll go into our 3D view. We're going to hide our base for a second. Okay, and now we're going to go into tile our views. We'll zoom in a bit. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and create the shape that we need. So we're going to select this outside vector, hold down our shift key, this inside vector, and then we are going to go to our shape editor, and we're going to create a angular profile that's equal to the thickness of this pad, and we know that's going to be 1.43 because we used that a while ago, so we know what that thickness is. And we're going to blend to an inner vector. Oh, we don't want any base height, I'm sorry. We're going to make that 0, my mistake. And we're going to make sure that we have 0 base height, and we're going to blend it to the 1.43, okay? And that will give us the right angle that we need for our bottle to fit into. Let's go ahead and apply that. And then we'll close this down. And you'll see in our 3D view, now we have the shape that we need. Well, we sort of do. We have a shape. So for right now, we're going to take that shape, and we are going to copy it to the other side, okay? So we have a copy of it on the other side. We're going to make sure we turn off our two-sided view just for a second. Now what we're going to do is take this shape and we are going to subtract it. So right click on that, change combine mode to subtract, and you'll see that now it is a hole. But we only want this side of the hole. We don't want this extra bit over here. So to do that, we're going to need a new level. So let's right click on this and we're going to insert a new level. Let's drag this component up to there. Let's right click on this and we're going to rename this level hole clip. Wrong hole. There we go. Hole clip. There we are. And then we are going to select this vector here and we're going to right click and we're going to go down to our clipping and we're going to apply that. And now you'll see that we're only using the part that we need on the front side, which is great. Now let's flip over to our other side. And we're going to do exactly the same, except we're going to use this vector that we copied over earlier, which is the exit point of the bottle out the bottom of our base. Hold down our shift key, grab that. We'll right click on this level, clipping, we'll apply that. Okay, and we forgot to rename that. And then we go ahead and look at our two-sided view again. We're going to see that this is proud of our base. We need to make sure that we subtract this, turn this into a subtract component. And now there we have it. We have our hole that's angled inside of there. Exactly what we'll need. And that's great. And that looks pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with that. So we're going to have to do a two-sided cut on this. We'll cut the top side, and then we'll flip it over, and we'll cut the hole in the bottom side to get this other part of this angle. Okay? It's wonderful. Now let's take a look at the tooling for this sheet. Okay, so here we have the file again that you're going to receive if you choose to purchase the extras pack, and we can have a look at the tooling that I created for the base. So let's just go ahead and double-click on that. Now, first of all, you're going to see that our component tree has the exact same set of components that you saw me make a minute ago, except for there's a new one here called zero plane. And so we'll take a look at that in a second. If we flip over our job, there's that one component on the other side that's been subtracted away. So that's great. Let's go back to the front again. Let's tile our views. And let's have a look at the tooling that I created for this. So on the top side, we have dowel holes. Again, being a two-sided part, we're going to need these dowel holes in there. We have a 3D roughing toolpath, which essentially is just roughing everything. And then we have a 3D finishing toolpath, which goes in and does all the finishing for us. And then we have a cutout. Now this cutout is only going to go down halfway through our material and add in some tabs. From the other side, we're going to cut back through half our material and add in tabs at exactly the same position. That way we'll have nice thick tabs to hold this in place. Keep in mind, this is a fairly thick piece of material we're using. Okay, so that's important to remember. If we flip over our job and look at the second side, we have our dowel holes that are going to be cut into our wasteboard. We have a 3D roughing, a 3D finishing toolpath, and then we have the second cutout toolpath here, again, that only cuts down halfway through our job. Let's go ahead and take a look at the front again, and let's preview our tooling for the whole job. Here we go with the roughing. There's the finishing again. We'll flip over, we'll do the other side. And there we have exactly the part that we want in the end. Now, a few things I want to point out to you about this part. One is that there's a raised lip here. You may have seen that when I was building the other option. That's only because there happened to be a wave there or something. Don't worry, you'll sand that off in the end. Now, with this particular version of the file that you're going to receive, you'll notice that inside of here, there's a bit of a step on the inside lip and a bit of a step here on the other side. I purposely wanted those in there when I first developed this and when I cut it, because I didn't want this area to be too thin with somebody pulling in and out the bottle. So that shape that I made, instead of being 1.43 tall, it was 1.2 tall, okay? And that gave me a little bit of this extra meat here on the edges to work with, which may or may not work out to my advantage. So if you decide that you don't want that there, then you just need to go in and scale up, or not scale up, but change the shape height of those two parts, one in the front and one in the back, those two components, and make them thicker to the 1.43, and you won't have that same thing going on. Also, there's a bit of gnarly cutting going on the inside here. That's because of the shape of my vector that I have here in the end that I was using for tooling. So that's something that you just, if you want to clean it up a bit, you could go in and clean up those vectors if you wanted to. But for me, I really didn't care because it's going to be covered up with the bottle in there anyway, so nobody's going to see that in the end. Yeah, and I was pretty happy with the way that looks. So let's have a look and see how it cut on the CNC machine. Out of all the parts we're going to cut for this project, this one made me the most nervous. First of all, the material is really thick, it's really hard, so I had to make sure that I had good tools and a good hold down method. So I went ahead and countersunk all of my screw holes, and then went in with my smaller drill bit and pre-drilled the holes so I could get those screws in nice and easily. And I also had to make sure I had long enough bits so that I wouldn't end up breaking them by mistake or bottoming out on the collet, which would be terrible. Now, one of the things I didn't mention when we were looking at the base was that there's an extra component in the component tree, and it is a zero plane that's been merged in. And I'm using this to stop the bit, the 3D roughing and the 3D finishing bit, from going down too far off the edges of my base. I didn't want it to plunge right to the bottom of my material. That would be bad for my bit. So what I did was I gave it a base height of 1.1 inches. So it's a zero plane that's been merged in with a base height of 1.1. And that stops the tool, again, from going down too deep. Really quite effective, and also it saves a bit of time as well if you position it properly. And this roughing pass is almost done, and it's exactly what I expected it to look like. And the center looks great with all those nice steps in there. And we put back in that ball nose again, and we're going to go in and do our finishing pass. Now this finishing pass did make me a bit nervous because of that tall straight wall in the middle of that hole, but it didn't seem to have any effect on it at all. It's an offset toolpath, so it worked its way from the inside out, which gave me some kind of nice machine lines to deal with. I didn't quite get them sanded out, they'd still look pretty nice. Now we're going to swap back in that 1/4 inch end mill and do the cutout pass at the half depth. Again, we lined up the tabs from the front and the back so that I'd have nice thick tabs to hold this in. And then both sides are only going down about halfway in the material. So those tabs will be right in the center of the sides of this base. Had a little quick measure of my dowels, and then I went and test fitted them. Everything looks good. Really quite happy with that. Now let's go ahead and cut the dowel holes into our wasteboard. I had to circle them there so I could find them in the end. And then I hammered in those dowels and then flipped over our part and pushed it down. And that all lined up perfectly. I wasn't worried about any warping with that because of the way that countertop was made. Again, I went in and I drilled some fresh new countersunk holes on the back side of this. Wasn't quite sure how far I'd gone down on the first side, although I used that duct tape method. And I didn't want to break through by mistake. So now we're going to go in and do our roughing pass just for the hole in the center of that. As you can see, that was a raster tool path. And there we go, we can see right through the hole, so that all worked out perfect so far. Let's put back in that bull nose again, and we'll go in and we'll finish up that and make those sidewalls nice and smooth. Now I did do a bit of air cutting here because there's a lot of material that was already moved. I could have optimized my tooling a bit better there, but in the end it did the trick. And if I was going to cut this again, then I might mess around with that a little bit, but for a one of, it worked out just perfect. Let's put back in that end mill again, and we're going to do the other cutout pass again at the half depth. And that was stuck down pretty good, so I really had to get it off the table. Have a look at that. Everything seemed to look pretty good. Use my trusty saw and cut the part out. And there we have it. And you'll see that there's the thick edge, the thick lip that I pointed out before that you could thin down if you wanted to, but I wasn't too worried about it. It actually was okay. It was thicker on the back than on the top. Not quite sure why that was the case, but I'm sure it was just some kind of an alignment issue there. I kind of messed up. And it's a bit rough in there, but I can finish that up later. And it's on the inside. Okay, now that we have those parts cut, it's time to get into some finishing. Now we are missing one thing, and that's a base cap for the bottom of our base. That way our bottle won't fall through the hole. Now to get that vector that we need to create the profile cut with, we're just going to use the 3D component that we have for the base and get that vector outline. Now, in all fairness, the bottle should have fit in this perfectly, but because of some of the problems I had with the bending oak, I had to do a wee bit of sanding to get everything to fit together. Let's do this piece first. Let's sand it and glue it. And then, glue it, and then once it's done gluing, I'm gonna have to do some more sanding. Do that. And then we'll come back to this when this is drying. I think that's the right way to do it. Yeah, it took a little bit of planning to figure out what order I was going to finish this stuff in. So I started off by finishing off the bottles. So I took those extra side panels and I sanded down the bottoms, and I sanded around partway up the side and then around the top of the curve so I could line it up with the flat spot on the bottle. sanded down the bottom of the bottle and made sure that it all kind of lined up perfectly. I did that with both. I think that was a pretty smart method. That way I could blend in the edges without having the mistake of over sanding maybe. And that all seemed to be happy, so I decided that this was the time to start to glue this up. I had to figure out a way to clamp this down. Round things are hard to clamp, so I came up with some kind of a method that was going to work. And I went ahead with my trusty paintbrush and put some glue on there and then put on the side panel. And then tried my best to clamp it down. Luckily we have a few clamps kicking around the labs. And now on to the second half of the bottle. And now while that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and start working on the base. So we'll get rid of those big chunky tabs on there. And that seemed to be really quite nice. And then I had to go cut the base plate. So this is the extra sheet that you have in the file. That's a base plate, and this just kind of glues on to the bottom to stop the bottle from falling out of the bottom of your project, and also gives it a nice finish. Just a simple thin piece of plywood was all I used for that. Then I had to glue it on, so I noticed that the surface of this material that I used, that countertop, was a bit shiny, so I sanded it down just a little bit, roughed it up a little bit, painted on some glue, and then this is where I should have used Michael Tyler's salt method. And if you don't know about his salt method, you can look at the Turtle Box project that we released this month, and he talks a little bit about using the salt to hold the parts together while the glue kind of sets. Now I had a ton of squeeze out here. I made a right mess, but I ended up going ahead and cleaning that all up again and letting it dry. So while it was drying, I went in and I shaped my bottle, both sides of the bottle, and then I fitted the pin in place, which was just a dowel that we had kicking around. Had to cut it to the right length, which that saw isn't great for, but it worked this time around. I glued in the end that was really tight, and then shortened it, or made it sure it was the right length with the sander, and everything seemed to work out perfect. Now having that together, I could go get my base. I wiped out all of the glue that was inside of it that kind of squeezed out inside, and then I tried to fit in the bottle. Well, as I'm sure you figured out by now, it didn't quite fit, so I had to do a bit of sanding to get it to fit. And the great thing about it is that with that pin holding the top of the bottle, I could just kind of keep sanding away, test fitting, sanding away, test fitting, sanding away, test fitting, until I was happy. And there you go. Now it's on to finishing. So here we have it, the finished thing all together. And I must say, I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. As you can see, we've got the base on the bottom, and the bottle does fit in there. Unfortunately, I need to do all that sanding, and it does actually come apart, which is great. I'm really, really happy with that in the end. It did have its challenges in the end, as you saw in the video, with the bending and the warping of the wood. But in the end, I think it's a very functional piece, and I hope that that you guys go ahead and at least get inspired to download some 3D content off the internet somewheres and create your own larger scale model of it, something bigger than those 3D printer guys can in the end. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that a lot. I hope you've been enjoying the 2021 online user group meeting. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you in my, my next presentation.